What if everything you thought you knew about Judas Iscariot was wrong? What if history's most infamous traitor was actually the only disciple who truly understood Jesus? Imagine the ultimate plot twist in the greatest story ever told. Judas didn't betray Jesus, he obeyed him. For 2,000 years, Judas Iscariot has been synonymous with treachery. His name has become our word for the ultimate betrayer, a Judas kiss, 30 pieces of silver, the disciple who damned himself. In churches across the world, he is portrayed as the villain of the Passion story, the fallen apostle who sold his master for money. But in 2006, the world was stunned when scholars revealed an ancient text that turns this narrative completely upside down. A forbidden gospel that tells a radically different story. One where Judas follows Jesus' own secret commands, one where betrayal becomes an act of obedience, one where the villain becomes the hero. The Gospel of Judas, a text so dangerous to mainstream Christianity that church leaders condemned it. Believers destroyed it, and for 17 centuries it vanished from history, until now. Welcome to Banned, Lost, and Forgotten Scriptures. I'm Derek Lambert, and today we're exploring the explosive text that rewrites the story of Jesus' death and resurrects the reputation of history's most maligned disciple. This isn't just an ancient manuscript. It's about power, heresy, and who gets to control the narrative of Christianity itself. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to catch every episode of our journey through history's most controversial religious texts. Hit that notification bell too. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Our story begins in the late 1970s in Egyptian desert near El Minya. Local treasure hunters digging in an ancient burial site unearthing something that would eventually shake the foundations of biblical scholarship. A leather-bound papyrus codex, an ancient book that had remained hidden for some 1,700 years. Inside were fragile pages of Coptic writing, including a text that scholars had only heard rumors about. The Gospel of Judas, a gospel written not by Judas himself, but in his name, presenting his side of the story. What followed was a story almost as dramatic as the gospel itself. The Codex passed through the shadowy antiquities market, stolen, recovered, shopped around Europe and America with potential buyers balking at the steep asking price. By 1983, a young scholar named Stephen Emel was invited to a Geneva hotel room to examine the mysterious find. He saw about 30 pages of ancient Coptic script, fragile but mostly intact. But the $3 million asking price scared off any legitimate buyers. And so this priceless piece of history, this text that could change our understanding of early Christianity, was locked away in a New York bank safe deposit box for 16 long years. Imagine these fragile pages, already deteriorating, left neglected in the dark while the world remained unaware of their existence. In April of 2000, everything changed. A Swiss antiquities dealer named Friedrich Nussberger Tchacos finally acquired the Codex. Recognizing its immense historical importance, she turned it over to experts. But the Codex Tchacos named in her honor was in catastrophic condition. The pages had broken into nearly 1,000 fragments. The leather binding had disintegrated. Many fragments were jumbled, out of order, with text missing or blackened beyond recognition. A team of experts led by Coptic scholar Rodolphe Kasser began the painstaking work of piecing together this ancient jigsaw puzzle. Carbon dating confirmed what they suspected. The manuscript dated to approximately AD 220 to 340, making it an authentic ancient text, not a modern forgery. Finally, in April 2006, the National Geographic Society unveiled the Gospel of Judas to the world. After 1,700 years of silence, the forbidden gospel could speak for itself. What it had to say was truly, absolutely explosive. This wasn't just another ancient text. This was a document that dared to suggest that Judas Iscariot wasn't history's greatest villain, but possibly the most faithful disciple of all. The Gospel of Judas presents itself as the secret account of conversations between Jesus and Judas during the final week of Jesus' life. Unlike the familiar Gospels with their narratives of miracles and the Passion, this is a dialogue gospel, a series of intimate conversations that reveal shocking secrets. The Gospel opens with a strange scene. Jesus observes his disciples celebrating what appears to be communion, and he laughs at them. Not a gentle chuckle, but an unsettling laugh that disturbs them.
Master, why are you laughing at us?
They ask, troubled. Jesus' response is cryptic and disturbing.
You aren't doing this in honor of my God, but in honor of your God. No generation of people among you will know me.
In this moment, Jesus suggests something shocking, that his closest followers are worshiping the wrong deity and completely misunderstand him. Imagine their shock and hurt. Only one disciple has the courage to confront him, Judas Iscariot. He steps forward and says something remarkable.
I know who you are and where you came from. You are from the immortal kingdom of Barbēlō,
and I am not worthy to utter the name of the one who sent you. In this gospel, Judas alone recognizes Jesus' true divine identity. He understands that Jesus comes from the highest heavenly realm, something the other disciples failed to grasp. Jesus tells Judas,
"Step away from the others, and I shall tell you the mysteries of the kingdom."
Judas is invited into an inner circle of one. In private, Jesus reveals to Judas an elaborate cosmic vision, essentially a creation story completely different from Genesis. Later, Jesus interprets a vision the disciples describe about priests and sacrifices, but his interpretation stuns them.
Those priests who receive sacrifices at the altar, that is you. The cattle you saw brought for sacrifice are the many people you lead astray.
Jesus effectively tells them they're false priests leading people to spiritual destruction. In this gospel, the 11 other disciples are portrayed as clueless, even dangerous leaders who worship the wrong God and teach the wrong message. Naturally, Judas is disturbed by these revelations. What about my own fate, he asks. Jesus doesn't sugarcoat it. You will be cursed by the other generations, yet you will come to rule over them. It is a bittersweet honor. Judas will be hated for what he's about to do, but in a cosmic sense, he will be exalted. Then comes the bombshell. Jesus tells Judas, look, you will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me. This is the ultimate twist. In this gospel, Jesus is asking Judas to betray him, to hand him over to death, to sacrifice Jesus' physical body. The phrase, the man that clothes me, refers to Jesus' mortal flesh, which imprisons his divine spirit. According to this gospel, Jesus needs to be freed from his mortal body, and he entrusts Judas with this painful task. Far from an act of treachery, the betrayal is portrayed as an act of friendship and spiritual service. After this revelation, Jesus gives Judas a vision. Look up your eyes and look at the cloud, and the light within it, and the stars around it. The star that leads the way is your star. Judas gazes up and sees a glorious luminous cloud symbolizing the heavenly realm. And Judas's own star ascends in the sky. It's a poetic way of showing that Judas's spiritual destiny is to join Jesus in the divine realm. The gospel concludes simply, and Judas handed him over. No Garden of Gethsemane scene, no kiss is described, just a simple statement that Judas did as Jesus asked. The Gospel of Judas ends with Judas's act of handing Jesus over, implying that this was done with Jesus' prior consent. The tragic irony is fully realized. The man damned by history as a traitor is, in this text, following Jesus' own command to enable salvation. Why would the author of the Gospel of Judas flip the traditional story so dramatically? Because this gospel is making a theological point. It presents a Gnostic interpretation of Jesus' death, one that directly contradicts the teachings of the emerging Orthodox Church. In mainstream Christianity, Jesus' crucifixion is an atoning sacrifice for humanity's sins. Tragic, but necessary, ultimately a triumph over sin and death. Not so in the Gospel of Judas. Here, Jesus' death is portrayed as a liberation from the physical body. Jesus tells Judas to help sacrifice his fleshly form, implying that dying will free his divine spirit to return to the heavenly realm. There is no suggestion that Jesus' death atones for anyone's sins. Instead, the crucifixion is almost a fortunate event because it allows the divine Christ to shed his mortal clothing. This is a complete reversal of meaning. The canonical Gospels call Judas's act an evil betrayal, but here it's the fulfillment of a divine mission. Jesus wants it to happen. The text also presents Judas as the obedient insider, the only disciple who truly understands God's plan. Rather than a devil-hearted traitor, Judas becomes the ultimate faithful disciple, obeying his master at a great personal cost. This rehabilitation of Judas serves to undermine the authority of the other apostles. The text asserts that the other 11 disciples did not learn the true gospel at all. Jesus taught the real secret only to Judas. In effect, it claims the apostolic church is built on ignorance. This is a bold attack on apostolic authority. If the 11 misunderstood Jesus, then the bishops and teachers who claim to follow their footsteps also lack the true knowledge. One of the most startling claims is that the 12, minus Judas, are worshiping the wrong God. When Jesus laughs at their Eucharist and says, "Your God is being praised," it implies that their God is not the true God that Jesus represents. The text even uses provocative language. It refers to the Christian communion ritual, eating bread as Jesus' body and wine as his blood, as a form of cannibalism, a gross practice that the true God would find abhorrent. Likewise, the gospel scorns the idea of martyrdom. Early Christians often taught that dying for one's faith was noble and would lead to heavenly reward. But the Gospel of Judas rejects this. It teaches that those who sacrifice themselves or others are serving the wrong master. This gospel effectively says, God doesn't want you to get killed for the faith. That idea comes from deluded leaders and false theology of sacrifice. In short, the Gospel of Judas presents a complete inversion of Christian theology. The crucifixion isn't a tragic sacrifice for sin. It's a welcome escape from material bondage. Judas isn't damned, he's praised as the facilitator of salvation. The Eucharist isn't a holy sacrament. It's a laughable rite that glorifies the wrong God. It's hard to overstate how shocking these ideas would be to mainstream Christian then or now. This gospel was effectively calling the established church blind and spiritually bankrupt. To understand why the Gospel of Judas presents such a radical alternative, we need to step into the Gnostic worldview, a dramatically different cosmic story that influenced many second-century writings. At the top of the Gnostic cosmos is the supreme God, an unknowable, invisible spirit often described as pure light. In the Gospel of Judas, God is essentially a luminous cloud, dwelling in an imperishable realm beyond our world. This high God is utterly transcendent and good. From this God emanates divine beings called aeons, eternal luminous beings that are aspects of God's fullness, the pleroma. How then to explain the physical world and its suffering? Gnostics propose that creation as we know it was the work of lower ignorant beings, not the true God. In the Gospel of Judas, Jesus describes how God allowed the emergence of lesser divine beings, angels and rulers, to rule over chaos and the underworld. Chief among these rulers is a figure named Nebro, also called Yaldabaoth. Another is Saklas, meaning fool. These are the villains of the cosmic story. They correspond to the demiurge, the false creator god. According to Jesus' revelation in the gospel, these lower gods and their angels create and rule the material cosmos. They are powerful but ignorant beings who lack the true light. One of these lower rulers, Saklas, and his minions create Adam and Eve, fashioning human bodies out of material stuff. However, humans aren't just clay dolls of the demiurge. The true God has a plan to rescue humanity. Sparks of the divine are given to some humans. Every human has a spirit, life force, on loan, but a certain chosen lineage, the Great Generation, receives a special soul directly from the true God. Thus, humanity is a mix. Our bodies and ordinary psyche are products of the lower powers, but within some of us lies a divine soul from the higher God yearning to return home. This is the essence of Gnostic dualism, the inner divine self versus the outer material self. In the Gospel of Judas, the goal of salvation is to escape the material realm governed by the archons and return to the imperishable realm of the true God. Jesus describes how people who are of the immortal generation, when they die, their bodies will die, but their souls will be alive and will be lifted up. Those not of this enlightened group will die in their spirits, meaning they will not ascend. They remain bound to mortality. In Judas's case, Jesus shows him a vision of his star ascending to the divine cloud, a clear indication that Judas's soul will be among the saved. To put it simply, the Gospel of Judas preaches a classic Gnostic dualism: spirit versus matter, knowledge versus ignorance. The material world is a deception orchestrated by lower powers. Jesus comes from the true God beyond, bringing knowledge that will awaken those who are spiritually akin to him, like Judas. The physical death of Jesus is not a defeat, but the moment his divine spirit is released from the prison of flesh, a victory over the material realm. Judas, in this framework, becomes the hero who helps defeat the cosmic villains by releasing the divine one, Jesus, from their grasp. It's a bold reinterpretation that only makes sense within a Gnostic mindset where dying can be winning and betrayal can be salvation. When the Gospel of Judas was published in 2006, it caused a sensation not just in the media but in academic circles. Scholars eagerly examined the text and interpretations diverged sharply. Renowned scholars Elaine Pagels and Karen King argued that the gospel is less about Judas himself and more about what Judas's story symbolizes in a 2nd century context. According to them, this text is essentially an angry protest against the emerging church leadership and its ideology of martyrdom. In the decades after Jesus' death, Christians faced persecution, and many church leaders extolled the value of dying for the faith. Pagels and Kings see the Gospel of Judas as pushing back hard against that trend. They interpret the Gospel as saying, God does not delight in human sacrifice or martyrdom. The vivid image of the disciples sacrificing people like cattle is a direct rebuke to Christian leaders who were, in the author's view, sending believers to slaughter for a false ideal. Bart D. Ehrman, another prominent scholar, largely agrees that the gospel subverts the Orthodox narrative, but puts more emphasis on Judas's role as the ultimate insider. He sees this text as portraying Judas as Jesus' closest confidant, and the only one who truly knows what's going on, which is a classic move in Gnostic literature, secret knowledge given to a select few. For Ehrman, the significance of the Gospel of Judas lies in what it reveals about the diversity of early Christianity. It's a stark reminder that some Christians in the 2nd century were reading the story of Jesus in a completely opposite way from what scholars might call proto-orthodox, and they were the majority. Not everyone was convinced that Judas is the hero. Scholar April Deconic offered a radically different reading that stirred controversy. Deconic re-examined the Coptic text and criticized the initial National Geographic translation. She argues that far from exalting Judas, the Gospel of Judas actually depicts Judas as a demonic figure who is tricked by Jesus. For example, Deconic points out that Jesus addresses Judas at one point as 13th demon in the Coptic text. The National Geographic team had translated that as 13th spirit, perhaps softening the term. Additionally, there's a critical line about Judas's destiny. The original translators understood Jesus to say that Judas would be set apart for the holy generation, implying Judas will join the divine generation. But Deconic proposes it actually says Judas will be set apart from the holy generation. Marvin Meyer and Rudolf Kasser, who were part of the National Geographic team, maintained that the Gospel of Judas is a genuine Gnostic text that casts Judas in a positive light. Meyer suggested that this gospel allows us to question what we thought we knew about the gospel story, reminding us there's more than one side to the story of Judas. Most scholars today still favor the view that the text elevates Judas in some way. But Deconic's challenges highlighted that the Coptic is fragmentary and not always clear, so multiple readings can exist. The debate continues in academic circles, but most agreed that the Gospel of Judas offers a stinging alternative perspective from early Christianity. It forces us to recognize that what became orthodoxy was once just one viewpoint among many. From the moment it surfaced in antiquity, the Gospel of Judas was marked as heresy. To the early bishops building what they saw as the true church, this text was anathema, a brazen inversion of the faith handed down by the apostles. The church father Irenaeus of Lyon, writing around 180 AD or AD 180, gives us the first and only ancient description of the Gospel of Judas. In his work Against Heresies, Irenaeus condemns a group of Gnostics who, in his words, declare that Judas the traitor was fully informed of these things, and that he alone, knowing the truth as no others did, accomplished the mystery of the betrayal. By him, all things, both earthly and heavenly, were thus thrown into confusion. They produce a fictitious history of this kind, which they style the Gospel of Judas. This remarkable passage shows that by the late 2nd century, Orthodox leaders were aware of a Judas gospel and utterly rejected it. To Irenaeus, the idea that Judas knew the truth and betrayed Jesus as part of a divine plan was a satanic lie. He calls the text a fictitious history, dismissing it as a fraudulent invention of heretics. Why such hostility? Because the Gospel of Judas undermined everything the early church was building. The apostles and their successors were the foundation of orthodoxy. But this gospel says the apostles were dupes. The church valued prophecy, martyrdom, unity under bishops. But this gospel mocks sacrifice and portrays the 12 minus Judas as spiritually dead. It even implicitly challenges the image of God. If the God the mainstream worships is a lower deity, then the whole edifice of Scripture and tradition is called into question. Such a text struck at the core of apostolic succession and authority. The church claimed authority through an unbroken chain from Jesus to the apostles to the bishops. The Gospel of Judas severed that chain by declaring the chain corrupt at the root, at the source. Thus, the gospel was labeled heretical, the worst of insults. Early theologians cataloged these kinds of writings as the false gospels of Gnostics, who they say were inspired by demons or worldly pride. Over time, copies of the gospel were not reproduced. Perhaps some monks or converts who owned such texts destroyed them or hid them away as the church's power grew. Indeed, the only reason any copy survives was likely because someone buried Codex Tchacos in the Egyptian desert, where it remained untouched until its 1970s discovery. The Gospel of Judas was condemned to oblivion, literally exiled from the canon. If you think about it, even the name Judas became synonymous with betrayal and evil in Christian culture. The reemergence of the Gospel of Judas in our time is astonishing. It's like hearing the voice of the defeated side of a theological battle that was fought 18 centuries ago. It reminds us that history is written by the victors. The lost scriptures show us the viewpoints that the victors tried to erase. The Gospel of Judas is one of the most radical reinterpretations of the Jesus story ever found. It invites us to imagine a Christianity where the black and white moral portrait of the Passion is turned upside down. What if Judas, of all people, got it right, understanding Jesus' mission better than anyone else? What if the crucifixion was not a tragedy to mourn or even a substitutionary sacrifice to celebrate, but a moment of liberation to be facilitated? Had the Gospel of Judas somehow triumphed in early Christianity, the religion would look very different today. Judas Iscariot might be revered as a saint, the faithful disciple who helped Jesus transcend this world. Perhaps churches would have icons of Saint Judas the Illuminated, holding a scroll of secret wisdom. The word Judas might not mean traitor at all in our lexicon, but something like insightful friend. Moreover, the whole focus of Christian teaching would shift. Instead of emphasizing sin, repentance, and redemption through Christ's blood, a Judas-centric Christianity would likely emphasize knowledge, enlightenment, and escape from the world. The crucifixion might be commemorated not as the Passion, but almost as a positive event, the moment the divine Christ was freed. Good Friday might be less a day of somber sorrow and more a day of paradoxical celebration. Church authority, as we know it, might not have developed the same way. If a text like the Gospel of Judas were canon, it would undermine the authority of apostolic tradition. Perhaps alternative leadership models would have arisen, maybe circles of initiates seeking personal visions and gnosis rather than a unified Catholic Church. Also, martyrdom, which played a huge role in the spread of Christianity, would not be glorified. Christians might avoid persecution and civic confrontation, seeking a quieter life of contemplation. Of course, this is all speculation. The Gospel of Judas was not embraced. It was denounced and buried. Orthodoxy won out, and with it, the narrative of Judas as the ultimate betrayer. Yet, today, having this gospel in hand, we are confronted with an alternative vision of early Christian origins. It forces us to ask, who tells the story? History might have been kinder to Judas had this text survived openly. Reading the Gospel of Judas now can be an unsettling experience. You almost feel transgressive, seeing Jesus laugh at cherished traditions and uplift the one who was forever painted as a villain. It doesn't mean we must agree with it, but it's valuable to hear that voice from long ago saying, there is another way to understand all this. In the end, the Gospel of Judas challenges believers and historians alike to not take the winning narrative for granted. It reminds us that early Christianity was diverse, full of debates about what Jesus' life and death meant. By flipping the script, the Gospel of Judas prompts us to re-examine the traditional story with fresh eyes. Why do we see Judas as evil? Because he betrayed Jesus. But if that betrayal were part of God's design, then the moral calculus shifts. As we close this exploration of the Gospel of Judas, perhaps we can reflect on a deeper truth. Stories are powerful, and who controls the narrative controls how we understand our world and ourselves. The message of this banned, lost, and forgotten scripture isn't necessarily that Judas was right or wrong, but that history is complex, that spiritual truth can be viewed from multiple perspectives, and that sometimes the characters we've been taught to revile might have been playing a role we never understood. Sometimes the biggest villain in one narrative might just be the unexpected hero in another. And recognizing that possibility, that complexity might be the most enlightening revelation of all. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of history's most controversial lost gospels. If this exploration of the Gospel of Judas has challenged your thinking or sparked your curiosity, please subscribe to MythVision's Banned, Lost, and Forgotten Scripture series. Hit the bell, get notified. There are so many more untold stories waiting to be uncovered. Ancient voices silenced by time and power that deserve to be heard again. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next revelation from the forgotten corners of religious history. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most important truths are found in the text we were never meant to read.